Welcome back, friends, and a brief update on what's going on MGO Blue podcast. Already out the radio replay of Inside Michigan Football and Defend the Block with coverage of the Men's Basketball Media Day because that season is getting kicked off. On Thursday, still to come, we've got the Conquering Heroes edition and the preview of edition for Michigan State. We got the in-state rivalry this week, so Thursday afternoon, that preview edition will come out on In the Trenches. Defend the Block with another post-game edition on Friday. But at this time, I want to bring in my partner, as you see him nodding his head very happily there, Mr. Brian Bush. Brian, how you doing?
I'm great, John. And just a reminder, folks, that today's episode is brought to you by DTE Energy. DTE has several tools and resources available to their customers that can assist with lowering their energy bill and reducing energy use. John and I will have more on that later in the episode. But hey, all is well. It's an interesting dynamic because, we were around the building on Monday and you have to flush what happened. As difficult as it is, the 24-hour rule, we've talked about it so much in the last few years about celebrating a win. Unfortunately, this team is learning the importance of making sure to flush the loss after 24 hours, as challenging as that may be.
Yeah, it is. It's always a challenge to try and get that out of your system. And the problem with football, the way it's designed, is it's one every 7 days. Now, maybe 6, maybe 5 at different levels, but you have to sit and stew for that long. And we thought coming out of the bye week that it was 2 weeks that they had to sit and stew after that long trip back from Washington. So, there's still a lot to work on with this team. Still a ton of work to be done, and it needs to get done quickly.
So let's get into it with our 7 from 77. We discussed some on the post-game episode, which I encourage fans to check out, some good analysis in the moment from Champaign when it was still very fresh. Now that you've had a chance to review, to talk to some folks, to look at it deeper, your biggest takeaways from a game where I think Michigan's defense played well enough to win, which we'll get to in a moment, but offensively and special teams, it just wasn't up to par.
It wasn't, and there's enough blame to go around. Whether it's the quarterback, whether it's turnovers, it's blocking, it's running routes. You look across the offense, and it's just not what it needs to be 7 weeks into the season, and it's painful because you've got guys that are trying hard, they're just not getting it right yet, and there are things that I think they could be doing in regards to running the ball. And at the beginning of the season, everybody's like, well, you're going to have to pass it at some point. Well, yes, I agree with that. But if your strength is running the ball, I would like to see this team have more opportunity to run the ball. And even if you're down 14 points in the third quarter, there's still plenty of opportunity. And we saw Michigan with a couple of long drives that ended up stalling or being, ending with turnovers. You still have plenty of time to operate your offense. And the strength of this team is the run game, and the strength of this program is the run game. And we need to see more of that.
So along those lines, number 2, where does the offense go from here? It sounds like you would really focus on the running game if you're trying to solve this. And what are your thoughts on the quarterback position? Offensive thoughts overall?
Well, offensive thoughts first is, you take that one scoring drive they had in the second quarter, and how did it start? It started with 4 Khalil Mullins smash mouth runs, 2 first downs. And then all of a sudden the play action pass, which I highlighted on Jansen Vision this past Sunday, what it does to those linebackers. And if you're struggling to throw the ball, the easiest thing is to hand the ball off and run. The next easiest thing is to run play action off of successful runs. That's what that drive showed that this team can do. And when you have that ability to draw those linebackers up, now there's this big gap in the defense behind the linebackers and in front of the safeties. Even if you don't have the arm strength to get it over the top, you still have the ability to go underneath. And whether it's Colston Loveland, whether it's Hogan Hansen, or any other receiver coming across the middle, that's where I think this team can really excel. Now, ideally, you're going to be able to develop more off of that, but you've got to take what you do well, execute it so that it can open up other things. And for the quarterback, it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes, because we saw early in the season Davis Warren have some turnover issues. Not all of them were on him, but he's the quarterback. He's the one that's going to take the blame on that. The only one that we really didn't see a lot of turnover issues with was it was one interception from Alex Orji, except you became very one-dimensional in that offense. And then I think we all felt a 7-year guy at college, a career college quarterback, would have protected the ball more. And I know on the both fumbles that he had against Washington and against Illinois, he's trying to make something happen. I can appreciate that. But what matters the most, even if you pick up first down yardage with your feet, if you don't finish the game or the play with the ball in hand, it doesn't matter. And so it's really going to come down to who is going to protect the football. And when I talked to him, when I say him, Sharon Moore on Monday, I asked him about Jaden Davis. We asked him in the morning show about Jaden Davis. And that's something that I think will eventually become an option in regards to you've gone through 3. Maybe you go back to Davis. Maybe you go back to Alex. If Jack Tuttle ends up being the guy this week, the turnovers continue, you're going to have to go a different direction.
And remember, the 4-game but can still redshirt thing probably comes into play a little bit with the math of Jaden Davis. Other thing to remember with him, he's been with the program since January. He was on the bowl trips to Pasadena and then to Houston for the national championship. That doesn't mean he was getting a ton of reps necessarily, but he's been around. So it'll be something to monitor. And again, as John mentioned, the radio replay of that radio show from Monday night with Sharon Moore talking very candidly, very openly about the situation at quarterback. Definitely worth a listen. All right, number 3, let's talk defense. Without Will Johnson much of the game, which, of course, that's a massive difference defensively. Frankly, it's a massive difference for an offensive scheme because a lot of teams have just said, all right, the Will Johnson side of the field, yeah, forget that. We're not going over there. So what'd you see from the defense, and how can they continue to go from what I think was, a B+ performance to the type of A performance that maybe the rest of this team may need for Michigan to win some of these games down the stretch against the better opponents they'll face?
So this defense, I like the aggressive nature that they played with, and I know it caused some personal or some PI pass interference calls, but the thing about it is you got to test the waters. First of all, in that game, you got to see how the officials are calling the game. And they were going to let those guys be aggressive, and it was going to go both ways. And whether it was Jair Hill, Amir Hall, Will Johnson early on, I love the fact that they were playing more tight coverage. I understand at times you're going to play off, you're going to give cushion, you want to let everything to keep it all in front of you. That's good at points, and it depends on down and distance, depends on circumstance of the game, score of the game, all of that matters. But there are other times where you're going to have to be forced to play man coverage, bump and run coverage, be physical at the line of scrimmage, and I like the fact that there seemed to be an emphasis on making that happen. And all in all, I thought the secondary played pretty well. Now, what I'd like to see is just the techniques continued to be improved upon. And when you're talking about young players, okay, why did you get this pass interference call? And was it even necessary? No, that we always see it when we see the replays in the NFL and we see it in college football. The guy is in possession, bats the ball away, but it's the off arm that has the receiver hooked. All of those things they're about confidence. You've got to be able to have confidence that you're making a play and you don't need that safety blanket. Why do offensive tackles, offensive linemen get called for holding? And a lot of it is because it's just poor placement of hands because you want to do what's safe. You don't want to be vulnerable in a moment that could, result in the big play for the other team. Trust your technique, trust your coaching, trust that you're going to go out there and be able to make the plays because you've done it at practice. And this is where I would echo Sharon, what he talked about on Monday. You got to take it from State Street to Main Street. It has to go from Schembechler Hall on the practice field when it's nice and comfortable and guys are performing and coaches are thinking, okay, they've got it. Now you've got to be able to take it to game time in the big house and perform when it matters most.
Number 4 on our 7 from 77. Let's talk about the rivalry. And hey, this team in the last few years has set 4 goals: win the Big Ten, win the college football national championship. Big Ten basically out now with 2 losses, playoff hopes on life support. So very likely this team's chances to win, to accomplish goals will be to beat the rivals. And one of them comes to town here on Saturday. From a program standpoint, how much does this week help in resetting, in refocusing, and just how important is this to you, to this fan base, to this state, despite, unfortunately, a 4-3 season that I don't think many people expected at this point through 7 games?
No, well, it's the direction of the program. And when you're talking about another in-state program, it's the trajectory of both programs. And you've got a Michigan State program that not a lot of people had high hopes for. And at 4-3, I think they've outperformed early in the season where everybody thought that the Spartans would be. So they're on a trajectory. And if you watch Aiden Childs, he is continuing to improve throughout the course of the year. I didn't think that they were going to have any chance to beat Iowa, yet they handled that game and they controlled that game from start to finish. He's had some turnover issues, didn't have the same issues. So are those being fixed? And you got a program that you feel like is getting better. And it's the difference for Michigan is there's a certain standard and a certain way that most people believe that this season would go. And at 4-3, most people believe the trajectory is on a downward angle. So now you've got these two programs coming together. It's a rivalry game. It's a game that's a statement game of where both programs are in this moment, in a snapshot that is 2024 season. And yeah, this is going to be a huge moment for both programs.
Number 5 on our 7 from 77. You alluded to Aiden Childs. The highs are high, the lows are low for this young quarterback. Just your thoughts on what Jonathan Smith has done, Childs' game a little bit more, and anything else that stands out. We'll get your keys on Thursday afternoon on the audio side, but what else stands out just as you kind of get the background on the Spartans?
This is a physical team. And they play exactly how you would expect a Spartan team to play. They're going to take no prisoners. They're going to give no quarter. And they're going to come out, even though there's a lot of new players on this team, they're still trying to figure everybody out and how to play together as they continue to go week by week. They're figuring it out. And it's going to be a physical team up front. And Michigan is going to have to figure out a way to run the football on this Spartan team. They're good against the run. We saw it against Iowa. I know Iowa had one big play against them, but the rest of the game, they tightened things up on that Iowa run game. So you're going to have to bring, and I love this game because of the intensity. Even if it's a 4-3 Spartan team against a 4-3 Michigan team, the intensity of this game will be there. Those in the big house, those that are watching, it's going to be intense. It's going to be physical. And the team that's going to take it to the other team, the team that will be the most physical, will win this game.
Before we continue our 7 from 77, John, we talked about it earlier. DTE can help our fans lower their energy bill and reduce energy use. Why don't you tell fans how that can happen through DTE?
All right, I've got 3 different ways. First, DTE's virtual interactive energy efficiency home, a 3D virtual experience that takes you room by room in your home, teaching you how to incorporate energy efficiency easily into your daily life. Second, the free DTE Insight app. It shows you how and when your home is using energy and how much it can cost. And they want to let you know how you can avoid surprises on your energy bill. It's a free download from the App Store or Google Play. And third, but not the least, the DTE Marketplace, where you could shop for energy-efficient products like LED light bulbs and smart power strips. Also, Wi-Fi thermostats, and you can get rebates instantly applied at checkout. To learn more about these energy savings tools or others, head to dteenergy.com/save energy. That's dteenergy.com/save energy.
Number 6, Big Ten storylines to discuss. We do it every week. Indiana continues its magical season. Boy, I thought Indiana would win. You told me 56-7, and they lose their quarterback. I'd tell you you're crazy. Curtis Rourke, indeed, out with a thumb injury. They are going to have game day in Bloomington. First time on a Saturday, I guess, ever in Bloomington for that show as the Hoosiers host Washington. Looks like it'll be Taven Jackson who took over for Curtis Rourke. Thoughts on the Hoosiers and still an undefeated season where I think Nebraska was the best team they faced, and they took them to the woodshed.
Yeah, well, in terms of winning record, yes, it's the first team they played with a winning record. And I mean, you can't underestimate what Kirk Cignetti has done in Bloomington. He came in, he's brash, he's got a lot of energy, and his teams play in the image of their coach, which is typically what happens. And when Curtis Rourke was in, for the first handful of games, and obviously at the beginning of this Nebraska game, he's a quarterback that's extremely composed, does a great job of taking care of the ball. I know he had one interception against Nebraska, but he does all the little things right. He extends plays. He's accurate throwing the ball downfield. He doesn't take unnecessary risks. And I mean, he's a good leader of this football team. And then all of a sudden, hey, he goes down and they bring in Taven Jackson, who we've seen over the last couple of years. He's a tremendous athlete. He was just as accurate, 7 of 8 against Nebraska. And this is a team that I don't know that there's another sport where belief, confidence plays as big of a part. It's always a huge part of athletic events and competitions. But in football, when you have a belief that you can go out there and you can win in every single game, boy, you are a dangerous team. And Indiana is playing with as much confidence, which is much belief, as anyone in the country.
When we talked to the start of the season, we talked in the spring, how difficult this Michigan schedule would be. And it has been, but the fact that Illinois was 5-1, put everything into the game last week that they did. Indiana could be undefeated when Michigan goes to Bloomington here in a few weeks. And Michigan did not deserve to win against Illinois. I'm not saying it was just because, Michigan might not have beaten a 3-3 Illinois team on Saturday, but the fact that this schedule had, until this past week, the number 1 team in the country in week 2, had USC week 4, trip to Washington. If Illinois and Indiana are really challenging games on that schedule, if you tell us that back in March, you're looking at the schedule like it's an NFL slate.
Yeah, and I mean, it's okay. We're looking back in retrospect now, and you'd like to have a couple of those gimme games, but what a great opportunity to play a schedule like this and to show off the opportunity. Not that they have the opportunity to show off as individuals, as a team, and it's just that's what really bums me out about where Michigan is right now, because they had an opportunity to really show up and show out this year, and to this point they haven't.
Another team that has not, USC, they fall to 1-3 in Big Ten play, losing at Maryland. The Terps had not been very good this year, 29-28. A couple years ago, Lincoln Riley turned USC around to a point where they went into the final weekend of the season with a chance to get into the 4-team playoff. Since then, things have really fallen off the rails. And I really wonder how a program like USC, they're already going to have to reimagine themselves here over the next, 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season. But based on what they used to play in the Pac-12 and what they're required to play in the Big Ten to have success, this program might need to do a 180 more than any of the others. And that includes a UCLA team that I think a lot of people expected weren't going to be very good. USC might have more looking in the mirror to do.
Well, but here's the thing about programs with the brand of a USC, with the brand of a Michigan. Now, you can't just rely on your brand, but you're that brand for a reason. You have resources that other schools don't. There is no level of athletics where you can turn things around more quickly than in college football. With the state of the business right now, with NIL and the transfer portal, you're going to have to go out there and convince a number. And every single year, there's going to be more and more and more college football players that enter the transfer portal looking for opportunity. What is it that you can sell for your program? And USC and Michigan are two programs that can sell a lot. There's a great history. There's a great tradition. And then you can also go out there because of the resources and be a huge part of whether it's NIL or it's the new, revenue sharing and NIL on top of that. However it sorts itself out, you're going to have the ability to go out there. And this is going to be a very important offseason for USC and for Michigan.
No doubt. This weekend, some big games. Oregon hosting Illinois, Ohio State getting Nebraska at home. And then I think a fascinating one, Penn State at Wisconsin. That one may be flying a little bit more under the radar because the Badgers have they've had a couple of blowout losses, but hey, they're still kind of hanging around, and I don't know what to call it, hanging around in the Big Ten race, but they're hanging around in the upper echelon of the Big Ten standings with 18 teams. There's, we might have 2 unbeatens playing Indianapolis here in a month and a half. Thoughts on any of those 3 games that stand out as we sit here a few days out?
Well, when Wisconsin lost their quarterback, you thought the season's over, but they've been able to salvage that, and they're 3-1 in the Big Ten. Whether or not Wisconsin is a contender in the Big Ten, I don't think most people really believe that that's a possibility. They have the opportunity to have a hand in who is significant in the Big Ten, who does make the Big Ten championship game. Penn State 3-0 in the Big Ten, Wisconsin 3-1 in the Big Ten. If they want to even the rankings, even the standings, they have the ability to do that, and it's in Camp Randall. And it's a great opportunity for the Badgers. I don't ultimately think that they find a way to beat Penn State, but we've seen stranger things happen with the James Franklin-led team.
It's a small spread. Vegas doesn't think there's a whole lot of difference between these 2 teams in that game in Madison. We'll see. Number 7 on our 7 from 77. Let's talk about some of the national storylines. And as we get now into late October, soon we'll have the first run of rankings from the College Football Playoff Committee led by Michigan's athletics director, Ward Manuel. So we'll get an idea of kind of where the committee stands. I didn't give a rip about those rankings the last 5-10 years because it was a 14 playoff. You kind of knew what teams would be in, what would need to happen. Now I'm fascinated where the committee will be at, especially considering some real parity down in the SEC, 2 marquee games, top 15 matchups. It was a top 5 matchup in Austin, Georgia doubling up Texas 30-15, then Tennessee sending Alabama to loss number 2. Rough year in the Volunteer State for the Crimson Tide. They lose in Knoxville 24-17. Takeaways from those 2 games. Hey, don't laugh. Vandy's ranked. We're going to get to them in a bit.
I know they're ranked 25. It's unbelievable, and that's what a win over Alabama will start to do for your program. In regards to the Texas and Georgia game, the thing that shocked me the most as I was driving home, listening to this game, and maybe I was peeking over at the iPad every once in a while, was the fact that Georgia's defensive front was having their way with the Texas offensive line. I thought the Texas offensive line, they've got some NFL talent on that line. It's experienced. It's played together for a long time. I was shocked at how often they got to, whether it was Quinn Ewers, and I know Manning played a little bit in there as well, how much they got to both of those guys. That to me was the biggest surprise over the weekend. And we could talk about scores and how things finished up. But in terms of a position battle, I was shocked that Georgia was able to do that to that Texas front.
Yeah, I mean, Texas looked like the number 1 team in the nation, I think fairly clearly until this last week. And then Georgia, they're really, really good too. One note I want to say about the SEC, I think we talked about this when the news came out about the SEC a while back. Oklahoma is 1-3 in the SEC. They lose to South Carolina 35-9. When you have these bigger leagues, it's just difficult with all these programs that have assumed 9-10 win seasons regularly. You're seeing parity at the top, where you're seeing teams that we know are top 15 teams in the country, and they're losing by, significant margins to teams you wouldn't expect. You get down to the middle and now the lower tier of this. I mean, Oklahoma, there have been few programs that have been as consistent in the national conversation over the last 20 years than Oklahoma. And we haven't talked about Oklahoma, the entire year on In the Trenches?
No, we haven't. And I mean, I think it's interesting. And you've got one coach that's had a hand in 2 programs that we're talking about, one at Oklahoma and at USC. The way Lincoln Riley left, how he left, when he left, who he took with him has greatly affected Oklahoma. Now, they've had plenty of time to come back from that, and now it's on Brett Venables to figure out a path back to success. But, he hasn't been any more successful since he's been at USC. Yes, a Heisman Trophy winner in Caleb Williams, but no college football playoffs. And we already talked about the record that they have in their new conference in the Big Ten.
We're really starting to see now, and it took a while, took longer than I expected considering all this condensing into a power 2, basically. But we discussed the big games in the Big Ten. We're getting that in the SEC with 3 ranked versus ranked matchups. Probably a playoff elimination game with Missouri at Alabama. LSU is at Texas A&M. Both those teams are unbeaten in the SEC, so that is a massive game for both the Tigers and the Aggies. And then the aforementioned number 25 Vanderbilt Commodores, ranked for the first time in 11 years. They get a pretty fired up Texas team coming to Nashville. You said it, stranger things have happened, but that might be a tough go for Vandy. Your thoughts on any of those 3 games?
I think it'll be interesting to see how Texas responds. And I mean, I honestly, after last year's, the way that college football, and this isn't about Michigan, it was about how the college football playoffs was set up, how the divisions and the conferences were set up. No more divisions. Conferences are consolidated into what you mentioned, the Big Two. I don't know that we see an undefeated national champion again. I just don't. And it's not likely that we see one this year, depending on what Oregon does the rest of the season. And in the Big Ten championship game, and obviously throughout the course of the playoffs. Are they a team that you look at as a dominant team in college football? And I would say no. The most dominant team to me would have been Texas up until last week. Now I look at the way Georgia has responded from their loss, and I say, well, it's got to be Georgia. But, if Georgia wins it all, again, we're not going to have an undefeated national champ. So it's wild. And there's one more game, Brian, that I am unbelievably excited for. And that is the first of the academies to play Notre Dame. It's an undefeated Navy team that is hosting Notre Dame. And I can't wait to see it in New Jersey. It's to me
hosting. This is at MetLife Stadium. It's not
it's
hosting.
No, but it's closer to, it's closer to Annapolis than it is to South Bend. And it's not in South Bend. And I'm very curious to learn more about Notre Dame, to learn more about Navy. And is it possible that we could have, this is the first opportunity. If Navy gets over this hurdle, then it's up to Army to get over the same hurdle in Notre Dame. Could we possibly have that build up to a conference title game last week of the season, Army and Navy versus, and then see it again the week after in what is traditionally the Army-Navy game?
Yeah, so we'll get to Big 12 ACC here in a moment, but you mentioned there won't be an unbeaten national champion. That's kind of the thought. I agree.
Yeah.
I didn't realize this till just now. There will not be an unbeaten SEC team because every SEC team's lost at least one game. They have 6 teams at 6-1 overall. That's crazy. We're sitting here we're not even in November yet.
It's wild to think about it. But it's the beauty and whatever. It's the beauty of college football, and it's the ugly schedules that these teams are having to play now. And it's the parity in college football. It's the gauntlet that you look at teams that are having to go through, whether it's a Georgia playing Alabama. Everybody loved to see that game. It was a great game. It's Georgia and Texas. Like it's those are great matchups, but being a part of college football right now and winning a national title has never been harder.
The crazy thing is there are 3 unbeatens in the Big Ten, and none of them face each other. Now, I don't think Indiana's going undefeated. I don't think Penn State's going undefeated. I think Oregon could. They have the best chance of that. But it is kind of crazy, the unique parallel. And again, this is just, we have to reframe the simplicity of just looking at a record and seeing how good a team is. Because You mentioned it, ugly schedules, but not fun from a fan standpoint. But man, it's a grind week in and week out, which is awesome. There are some unbeatens in the Big 12 and the ACC. Wanted to get your thoughts on this. Very interesting that both BYU and Iowa State surviving with home wins 38-35 to get to 7-0 overall. Cougars beat Oklahoma State. Cyclones knock off UCF. There's only one other team in the Big 12 that does not have multiple overall losses. Kansas State is a 1-loss team. If BYU and Iowa State are barely surviving Oklahoma State and UCF, at best middle of the pack teams in that league, I think the Big 12 is very likely to only get their auto bid into the playoffs just because of the carnage in that league.
Yeah, and all the teams that are they're paired up well because they're like versus like, but there's no dominant team. I don't see BYU as a dominant team. I don't see Iowa State as a dominant team. You mentioned Kansas State. I know they're ranked, but they're not a dominant team. And will we even have, two undefeated teams by the time the conference championship game rolls around?
I
I mean,
mean, we might not have,
BYU, through 2.5 quarters of that game last week, I didn't think they were going to make it through.
and they've looked better than Iowa State.
Yeah, I agree. I think BYU, looking at the teams in that conference and where they are, what their schedule says they are, BYU is clearly the best team.
Yeah. The other interesting aspect, so much talk around Deion Sanders, Coach Prime in Colorado, much of last year, early on this year, and after barely beating a very good FCS team in North Dakota State and losing very convincingly at Nebraska, the Buffs have rattled off 4 of the last 5. The one loss was by 3 to the aforementioned K-State Wildcats. This is the quietest it's been about Colorado, and they're 5-2.
Right, 5-2, 3-1 in the conference. And I mean, yeah, don't look past anyone right now in honestly any of the conferences, because scheduling, and it's sometimes it's where you play them, it's when you play them, who you have available, it's what type of win or loss is the team coming off of. There's so many variables right now in college football, and it makes it wildly entertaining.
Yeah, and Colorado does not face any more ranked teams this year. They've got a pretty reasonable schedule. Their lone road games are at Texas Tech. That's a big one. And then at Kansas, who has been disappointing this year. ACC, they're structured differently. This is a big week in the ACC for some of the teams you wouldn't really think about in the playoff conversation that might be able to get into it. Miami, they win a wild one over Louisville. I mean, Miami's got a weird season going. They win at 52-45. Clemson takes care of Virginia, so they're 6-1 overall, 5-0 in the ACC. But the ACC, unlike the Big 12, they have 6 teams with 0 or 1 loss overall. I mentioned Miami and Clemson. The other 4 play each other this week. Syracuse at still unbeaten 6-0 Pitt, and then SMU at Duke, an ACC classic. Can't wait to see that at Cameron in like January or something too. But those 2 teams, we're going to find out who are the teams that can realistically dream about a playoff opportunity. And I don't think we were sitting here 3 months ago saying, boy, can't wait for Syracuse, Pitt, and SMU Duke. But the ACC is at least not having the battle royale carnage that the Big 12 has had, which is important for the league's chances to get 2 into the playoff.
Yeah, and what's wild about the ACC right now is it's their scheduling quirks, where you've got some teams that have already had a couple of bye weeks, like Pitt, where their conference win-loss record, they're 2-0 versus Clemson, who's 5-0. Like, it's ridiculous, the fact that you are in week 7, you've only played 2 conference games. It's hard to, and so you're looking at, well, how real is Pitt? How real is Clemson? The Clemson's lone loss was the opening game of the year. They got blown out, but since then, they've been a team that has put up astronomical numbers offensively. Miami, and maybe it does come down to Clemson and Miami, and if they're both undefeated, maybe the winner and the loser of that championship game does get in, and they get 2 teams in. But I'm looking at it and wondering how many from the ACC will get in, and if they have a 4-way tie at the top with teams with 1 loss, like the tiebreaker system will be stressed, to say the least.
No doubt. Yeah, Clemson's final 2 games of the regular season are non-conference. Clemson's last conference home game is its next game. They have a bye this week and then host Louisville on November 2nd. That's
bizarre.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, that is our 7 from 77. We pivot now. Great conversation on the audio side John had with center Greg Crippen. On the video side, we're going to do another 4th and short here as we talk about some of the other angles to Michigan State. We'll get John's top 4. There could be some shuffling around. Certainly encourage fans to who are watching live, any questions, thoughts on the matchup. We will answer those as we go along as well. But Jon, I want to start with just the most important players for Michigan going into Saturday, whether it is on the field, leadership-wise, needing to step up their game. Give me your three, or if you have more, I'll take them. But I want at least three guys from you that we're going to be circling, underlining, bolding between now and Saturday at 7:30.
Well, I'm going to give you three, and I took some liberties with this just a little bit. Number one is an individual. It's Kalel Mullins, and Kalel Mullins may decide this game. He's a guy that has been the most consistent for Michigan, really on both sides of the ball. He is an unbelievable ball carrier, and I think he needs more opportunity. I think he needs to start the game. He needs to be in there in the middle, and he needs to finish the game. And he's got that championship mentality. He's got that heart of a champion. And while Michigan's not competing for a championship this year, he's the guy against USC that went out there and took control of the game and ultimately won that game for him. Even against Illinois, those 4 runs in the start of that scoring drive, they were tone-setting runs. That is exactly what Michigan needs. And so I'll follow it up with my number 2, which is not an individual, and I'll give you one if you need it. I'll say Greg Crippen, but it's the offensive line. Offensive line has to control the line of scrimmage. The team that controls the line of scrimmage in this game will win the game. And it's as simple as that. It leads to turnovers. If your quarterback is under duress, if he's hurried, neither of the quarterbacks, and I do think Aiden Childs is obviously a better quarterback than what Michigan will be able to field, but he's been prone to turnovers. What happens when he gets outside the pocket? He's got great ability, but with that comes great confidence and sometimes overconfidence, and he's been costly for them at times. If you could control the line of scrimmage and allow your quarterback time to sit back there and deliver the football, if you could control the line of scrimmage and control the run game, you will win the game. And for number 3, I'm just going to flip the tables on it, and it's going to go defensive line. If you slow down the rushing attack and you force Aiden Childs to be a passing quarterback, to make lots of decisions, there's a chance he makes all good decisions, but I like the odds at where he is in his career. Is he going to be a good quarterback? Yeah. Is he a good quarterback now? He's becoming a good quarterback, but he can turn the ball over.
Quarterback plays. He's had some sequences.
And he's kind of got it. Sometimes it's hard to decide what Aiden Childs is because he's a dynamic playmaker. He's a tremendous athlete. He can throw the ball a mile, but he has early in his career Adrian Martinez tendencies where you could play good for 59 minutes and then it only takes one time for there to be a turnover that costs you the game. And he's done that a couple of times this year, and it's not all on him, but we know how important that position is. And so for me, the 3 most important players/positions would be Kalel Mullins, number 1. Number 2 is offensive line, and if I got to name a player, it's Greg Crippen, the center of that offensive line. And number 3, the defensive line, and if I got to name a player, it's Mason Graham, the guy that so much is expected of.
I'll give you one more in a moment, but I have a tough question for you. Mm-hmm. Who's Michigan's best offensive lineman right now?
I would probably have to say when healthy, it's probably been the most consistent has been Miles Hinton. And
it goes to show you the difference in the offensive lines last year to this year because Miles Hinton lost his starting spot.
Yeah, it's the offensive line. It's not even fair to compare those two.
I'll throw one Makari Page. He's someone who people have talked about as a captain. He leads more by example, and when he speaks, people listen. And I think with the potential of Will Johnson being out, with what Aiden Childs does through the air and on the ground, I think Makari Page needs to have his best game of the season on Saturday night.
I would agree.
Yeah. Here's the reality of this one, and it's my second topic. Anytime you play a rival, there is a lot to gain. I don't care the circumstances, where you are in the standings. Last year's Colson Loveland even kind of talked about it a little bit on the radio show last night. Last year's didn't quite feel the same just because Michigan State was going through. They had a brutal season, the coaching controversy issues, whatever. They were playing out the string, and it didn't have the same feel. But this is a rivalry where boy, you kind of can throw out the record books in a lot of cases. Certainly more so than what happened, what has happened at the end of the year over the last 20 years or so. But it does feel like with where these two programs are and where they were this time last year, I think I'd make the argument there is more to lose in this game than there is more to gain if Michigan takes care of business. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. There's more to lose for Michigan. If Michigan State loses this game, it was kind of supposed to happen. And if Michigan loses in this game, it goes back to all the things I said at the beginning of the program, where you've got two programs at the beginning of the season. While nobody expected Michigan to be a national championship type of season for the Wolverines, they expected 9 wins at a minimum, and some of us, and myself included, expected more, and we were wrong. And now you're looking at these two teams meeting in the middle of the season at week 7, both of them 4-3. And so I think there's much more to be gained by Michigan State and much more to be lost by Michigan.
Yeah, I agree. It's this is a pivot point. Obviously 24/7 news cycle, commentary, thoughts, recruitment. It's a very short life cycle. Michigan could lose this game and then upset Oregon, and then you got stuff happens week to week, right? But yeah, this feels like a massive game to hold serve in the rivalry, to not give, I think, an up and coming program the type of momentum where we talked about it last week on the pregame show at Illinois. That was a marketing moment for them. There will be pictures from that game that they'll use 10 years from now on some of their social media, their pamphlets, their brochures, their recruiting elements. Good on them. They did it. They earned it. They won the game. This would be that for Michigan State. Can't let it happen at the Big House. And John, it's happening in a night game. It surprised me that it was a night game. And I think it kind of goes to show you, Michigan fans should be thankful that Ward Manuel is so firm with the Big Ten and established with the Big Ten that there are no more than 2 night games at home every season. That is solidified. He has established. You only get so many deal breakers. And look at Michigan State's got, this is what, their 6th night game coming up, and they already got another one scheduled for later in the year. So as frustrating as it is, be thankful that it could be more. This is an area where Ward Manuel and company said, no, this is it. So this is the last night game at home.
Yeah, I'm surprised that it was a night game. I thought maybe there was a chance that Oregon would become a night game, but it goes to how irrelevant that game is now. Not that it won't be a big game, and we know Ohio State's going to be at noon. So this one, you got two programs that are right now largely irrelevant in college football. And you play it at noon, and it just gets lost in the shuffle by everybody else. You play it at 3:30, again, lost in the shuffle. You play it at night, and I think it's even more so lost in the shuffle because there's going to be some really big-time matchups that are going to be playing. So I'm surprised that it was put at night on a network that's, other than locally, who's going to be watching Michigan State, and who's going to be watching the Big Ten Network.
Yeah. And I think still every team has to have at least one conference game on Big Ten Network. If I recall, I don't know that for sure. The reality is we just don't know exactly all the inner workings. Fox has the most selections, the most high profile selections in all of this, but they don't get the first pick every week. So honestly, I think fans would be interested in knowing a little bit more about how this plays out and what goes into it. They have a draft in the spring you're not picking games, you're picking pecking order during the week. So, for example, the first pick every year is Fox based on these agreements, and they don't pick Michigan, Ohio State. They pick the first selection in the final week of the regular season, which will be Michigan, Ohio State. But that's what they're selecting. They don't get the first pick every week. So Big Noon is not always the biggest game. Case in point, we've seen some interesting Big Noon kickoff selections here in the past. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I know that fans largely wish it were at night. I agree. I wish this was prioritized as a non-night game in both Ann Arbor and East Lansing.
Sure.
But TV, they got a lot of power because
they run the show.
Mm-hmm. Playoff thoughts. We had some good discussion last week about your top four. I'm curious now. Give me your top four. This isn't top four in the actual end of your bracket because that would include an ACC and a Big 12 champion. But right now, if you were going on best four teams in the country, how would you rank them?
Well, I would have to start with at number 4. I mean, Texas drops out because they have the loss. Penn State would be at 4. I've got Ohio State at 3 because they lost to, a better team. Georgia is at number 2, and I've got Oregon at number 1. And I know Jack and I got into it a little bit in the pregame because he was all about Alabama. Well, what happened to Alabama? And it's,
Jack had them in the top 4, right? He said he would put them in the top 4.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he loves himself some Alabama.
You know what? Hey, we're gonna make a pact right now. Saturday, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan tailgate show. We should ask him if Vanderbilt should be in the top 4.
Yeah, they beat Alabama. I mean, they're a team that no one goes to Vandy and just walks out with a win.
So Jack, Tennessee 1, Vandy 2.
Yeah.
Alabama 3. Yeah. I'll ask you again. If I'm saying best, it seems like this is more deserved than best. Penn State plays Texas tomorrow on a neutral field. Who do you pick to win?
Well, Texas. But we're talking college football. We're talking, and it's not best. It's deserve. And if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC and you're undefeated, are you the best team? In college football, we saw it last year with the 4 playoff teams. Georgia was one of the top 4 teams last year, yet they didn't get a seat at the table. I know that the world is a different world that we live in right now, but college football isn't about the best. It's about the most deserving. I mean, and let's operate under the same auspice that everybody else is operating under.
I see. I still don't agree with you on. We could talk about that playoff. It'll
sort itself out on the field.
Thank goodness it does now, because I mean, as much as I felt for Florida State because they went undefeated last year, I'd have felt even worse for a Texas team that beat the team that beat Georgia, and they beat them in Tuscaloosa.
I agree,
because that's the one you said they leave out. To me, that's impossible.
I agree, but you can't sit there and tell me that Georgia wasn't one of the top 4 teams last year.
I think I could.
You put Georgia. Oh, okay.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, Michigan and Washington, but Texas beat Alabama in
you
Tuscaloosa.
Put Georgia on the field with Washington last year. What happens? I think Georgia blows the doors off.
No.
We can agree to disagree on that, but I think the misconception is that
if you were the committee last year, and you were just tasked to do the best 4 teams, you would have done Michigan, Texas, Georgia, and Alabama?
No. I probably would have done Michigan, Washington, Georgia, and Alabama.
All right.
I mean, it could have been Michigan, Texas, Georgia, Alabama. That'd have been fine too. But you can't sit there and tell me that Georgia was not one of the best teams, one of the top 4 teams in college football last year.
Thank God we don't have to do this year. Yes. We get to debate BYU versus Indiana. That's what we get to do now. So
that's really exciting.
I've always thought that it would make more sense. By the way, Dakota Kid, agree with you, John. Georgia wins. Then why are we playing the regular season? That'd be my argument. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think it's fascinating going into this year because you have these teams that will have imperfect resumes, and I mean, again, we talked about the SEC. They have 6-1 teams. 6 of them are 6-1. But I've always been a believer. I wish you could just custom fit the playoff model to the season. The year the classic Vince Young, Texas, USC, Rose Bowl. We all knew who the top 2 teams in the country were. Just play the game. Remember 2007, where I think there were 12 teams that were number 2 in the nation. That's where you need a 12-team playoff. Screw it. Let's do a 68-team playoff like the basketball, because we had no idea. I think that was the year LSU won with 2 losses, right?
Yeah.
So I wish we could just custom fit this, because last year would have been a perfect 6-team playoff. You have Michigan and Washington with byes. You play those other 4 teams that everybody talked about, the 3 we've discussed, and then Florida State, they were undefeated 13-0. Give them a chance without Jordan Travis, and then you just play it out. You can't do that, I know, but I wish we had a way to set it up to where you could, because that'd be the other thing. If you want to eliminate Florida State, I would have loved to just see Texas play Georgia. Just finish the triumvirate, right? Just finish it, and then the winners await the 2 undefeated power conference champs.
Well, when college football finally, grows up, and they want to play like the big boys, then you'll have an NFL style of playoff where you have divisions and you have conference, and then ultimately those 2 conferences play for the national title. That's where you get rid of all of this useless discussion of who's best and all that. You earn your right to get into the playoffs, and at that point, it's 0-0 for everybody, and you go after it.
You don't think we're already there?
No, we're close, but we're not there.
Frankly, I wish would happen, and I think what the Big Ten and the SEC should look into, is what they did in the pandemic year, where the last regular season game of the year was just, they had the Big Ten championship game, top 2 teams, and then you play the 3 versus the 4. And then you play the 5 versus the 6 championship week, right? You want to get a 9th game, you want the money, that's great. But a 3 versus 4 Big Ten game is going to be more impactful for the league than the 1 versus 2. Because same in the SEC, almost every year, that's just going to be for a bye, and the other team's going to be in the playoff.
Right.
But a 3 versus 4, say Penn State loses to Ohio State, and say Oregon and Ohio State play in the Big Ten championship game, and you have Penn State versus Indiana on December 7th. Isn't that a playoff play-in game? If Indiana's 11-1?
Yes. If
they're custom fitted to put yourself in position to get as many teams in there as possible. I'd be more fascinated in 2 teams playing for their season's life than I am now for a championship where in essence, it's just about, for a lot of programs, it's just about a bye week. That's what it is.
No, I agree. And I mean, the reason I say, let's just make it like an NFL system where you have the AFC and the NFC, take the teams that matter out of the Big 12 and the ACC, absorb them into the SEC and the Big 12, or the SEC and the Big 10. And now you have your 2 conferences. You have your ability to do the seeding for the playoffs, 7 teams, and you can make it bigger if you want, but it sets itself up then to be able to have, you got 2 number 1 seeds on both sides. They get their bye. Everybody else has to play wild card games.
Are you pro relegation?
No, if you're out, you're out. It's just, I mean, it's all about the money. And you can't tell me, okay, Vandy, that's a cute story. It's fun, and I know they're very smart, but they're not.
Vandy's not the concern. The concern's like an Iowa State, right, or a Kansas State. That Vandy's in. They happen to be in the right place at the right time with their league.
Right, but it's just a matter of, you take the biggest programs, the ones that are currently the strong programs, because they are traditionally the stronger programs, and you just make one big conference or one big league, and you split them into 2 conferences, and then you just move from there. And then everybody else, you're going to have somebody left out. So be it. Leave them out, and then they can create their own national champion.
You just want to get Notre Dame in a conference, don't you?
No, I don't care if they're in a conference. That's fine. I mean, if they want to join a conference, that's great. But
that's the only way they would, I think, right?
Sure, if that's the only route to being, relevant in college football, yeah, they'd be in.
Well, it's a good discussion.
Yes. somewhat unprepared for that one, but
We're
yeah.
going to relitigate a playoff ranking from 10 months ago.
Yes. Yeah. Michigan wins
all right.
it all.
Correct. Yeah, Doug played great antagonist last week on the show by just being, I like how it worked out. I think it was good.
Yeah.
Anywho, good stuff. We'll be back again next week. We'll be back on Thursday on the audio side of In the Trenches, presented by Meijer, with the keys of the game, John's locker room speech, and Greg Crippen on the show on Wednesday. Really fun conversation with him. So be sure to check that out. For Jon, I'm Brian. Thanks for listening.